Okay, welcome to part 2. So we have been talking about ואהבת לרעיך כמוך, and we got to the mitzvahs that the rabbis had instituted out of ואהבת לרעיך כמוך, and the last one we were talking about was carrying the dead onto our shoulders, making sure that we bring them to be buried. And that goes on with the next phrase, לרעיך לפניו לספוד לחפור לקבור, that we walk in front of them out of respect, we escort them to their burial, and what we do is we eulogize them, we dig the grave, and we bury them. These are all acts of chesed. In fact, the Gemara will go along and say that this is what we call chesed shel emes. We call this the greatest amount of respect that we could have for somebody. V'chein lismoch hakala v'chasan. And also to make the kala and the chasan happy, the bride and the groom, we actually have a mitzvah. When we go to a wedding, it's not just enough to enjoy the food. We have to dance in front of them and make them happy. And we have to feed them with all that they need. And the Rambam explains that these are acts of chesed. These are acts of chesed, acts of kindness, that have no measurement to them. In other words, well, how far do I have to carry the dead person to fulfill the mitzvah, right? Like when we talk about drinking for kiddush. So we make kiddush, we say, how big does the cup have to be? And we talk about putting our tefillin on. How long do we have to keep our tefillin on to be able to say the mitzvah? All mitzvahs generally have a measurement. Chesed doesn't have that. You could fulfill the mitzvah of chesed even with very little. But now here comes the line of the Rambam that is very important to us. And see, it says Ayin, Aleph, Ayin, Pei. Right? That's an acronym, and it stands for Af, Al, Pi. Even though Shekol Elu Mitzvos Midivrayim, even though all of these mitzvos are rabbinic in nature, meaning that the rabbis are the ones that made these mitzvos. You can look through the Torah, it doesn't say anywhere you should visit the sick. You look through the Torah, it doesn't say anywhere you should bury the dead. You look through the Torah, it doesn't say that you should have guests over or console mourners. It doesn't say any of those things. So even though these are rabbinic, the Rambam says, Hare hein bichlal ve'ahavta lira'echa kamocha. Each time you do these, you're fulfilling the Torah command of loving your neighbor like you love yourself. So really, the mitzvah of ve'ahavta lira'echa kamocha doesn't tell me that I have to do these mitzvahs. That it doesn't say. It doesn't say that I have to do these mitzvahs. But what it does say is that we have to fulfill these mitzvahs from a rabbinic level, but each time we do, we fulfill a Torah law of ve'ahavta lira'echa kamocha. So the Torah law doesn't say we have to do the mitzvah, but every time we do one of these mitzvahs, we get the mitzvah, the Torah mitzvah. That's the idea. So it's an important line from the Rambam that I hope you're catching. If not, hit rewind and play again. The idea being that every single time you do an act of chesed, right? You visit the sick, you have guests over, you console a mourner. Every time you do one of these things, although you're not commanded to from the Torah, you fulfill the mitzvah from the Torah. You're doing the mitzvah of the Torah by ve'ahavta lira'echa kamocha, by loving your neighbor as you love yourself through an act of chesed. Now, we understand ve'ahavta lira'echa kamocha now. We understand that we don't have obligations, but the rabbis came along and instituted some of them. That we all get now. I'm hoping we're clear on that. But here's an interesting twist. Let's look at source number 5. And look what the Rambam says here. Hadrachim v'hatovim v'yesharim shenemar v'halachta b'drachav. The Rambam says we're commanded to walk in straight ways, to act in proper ways. And where do we get that from? The mitzvah of v'halachta b'drachav, which means we should walk in God's ways. Now, what does that mean, we should walk in God's ways? Right? We know God doesn't walk. We know God has very interesting ways of acting that we don't fully comprehend. We don't understand everything that God does, and we're supposed to this mitzvah tells us to walk in the same way He does, to imitate Him almost. Well, how are we supposed to do that? So here's what the Rambam says going on in Halacha Vav. This is the second part of the larger paragraph in source number 5 on your sheets. Look what the Rambam says. Kach lamdu b'peirush mitzvah. This is how we understand this mitzvah. Mahu nikra chanun, afata nikra chanun. Just like God is called kind, so too, right? We don't know if God is kind. We look at God's actions and we say, wow, that looks like a kind God. He gives us food. He gives us the clothing that we wear. He gives us shelter. I'm in my beautiful study here in Boca Raton. Right? So God gives us all of these things, so He seems kind. And just as God also, right, it says, Mahu nikra rachum, just like we call God merciful, afatah ya rachum, so too you have to be merciful. inside, in what we call your kishkas, they're located like right around here, that you have to be inside, you have to be a kind person. It's not enough just to act in a kind way. You, this mitzvah says, you must be kind. Mahu nikra kadosh, afataya kadosh. Just like God separates himself from physical needs because he has none, so too we have to do that. We have to become kadosh and sanctify ourselves, separate ourselves from physical needs. And then the Rambam says, right? That's why you look when the prophets talk about God, whether it was Moshe Rabbeinu, Yehoshua, Yeshaya, Yechezkel, Yirmiyahu, all the different prophets that we had, what do they call God? Erech HaPayim, slow to anger. God doesn't have anger, but they're giving God these quote-unquote nicknames to instruct us on how to act. Right? So they called God Erech HaPayim. They said that he was Rav Chesed, great in Chesed and kindness. They said that he was Tzaddik, Yashar, Tamim, Gibor, Chizuk, V'chayotzaben. He was straight, perfect, a warrior, strong. Why? L'hodia shehein drachim tovim, to teach us that these are the proper paths. V'chayev adam, and a person is obligated linog atzmo bahen u'idamos alav kafi kocho. And a person has to act this way and try as best as possible to imitate these descriptions that we describe God by. That is the command. Now here's the interesting thing. We would say ve'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha, that you should treat somebody as you want to be treated. And the second mitzvah of being kind, I wish I had my whiteboard here. Imagine a whiteboard here. This one would say, ve'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha, that you should be kind to everybody and act towards everybody the way you want to be treated. And over here we have, v'halachta b'dracha, that you should walk in God's ways and you should be kind. Put these two together, don't they seem very similar? This mitzvah is telling me to be kind to my neighbor. This mitzvah is telling me to be a kind person. Now hopefully you're catching the difference. What's the difference between the two? Very simple. Ve'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha is teaching me to act towards others in a certain way. V'halachta b'dracha is telling me to become a certain person. Ve'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha teaches me I should treat others in a kind fashion. V'halachta b'dracha teaches me I should become a kind person. Right? Very, very interesting. I can fake being kind to somebody else, but that doesn't make me a kind person. I can fake being nice to somebody else. Doesn't make me a nice person. But the other mitzvah of walking in God's ways that we find in source number 5 here, that teaches me that I have to actually become a kind person. Very, very different types of mitzvahs. Let me get out my question sheet here. Pardon me while I step off camera sort of for a minute. And here we have our questions. I'm hoping that you'll go through them. The first one is, just to make sure we got our facts. Give me 4 acts of chesed, right? 4 mitzvahs of gemulos chasadim that we talked about, okay? Those can be found listed in source number 4. Write a common occurrence in your household where one of these halachos might be difficult to follow, and what you do and what you plan on doing to overcome the difficulty and follow the halachos. Okay, how are you going to be able to do it? And lastly, what do you think the objective of the mitzvah is? Right? What's the common denominator about all these laws? Right? What do you think it would be? Right? We sometimes call this the big idea. Okay, the nature of the mitzvah. So those are the 3 things. I hope you enjoyed this extra learning, this flipped classroom sort of, and I hope that you learned a lot from it. Okay, let me know. All the best. Shalom.